The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to our webinar today, How to Lead Your Business Through Change, by Tina Schulke of Change Management Communication Center. My name is Ryan Kauf and I will be your host today. I direct the Wisconsin Small Business Development Center, or SBDC, at UW Green Bay. The Wisconsin SBDC is a statewide network of resources working with small business owners and their executives to facilitate their business's growth and improvement and to help launch successful new companies. The no-cost business counseling and low-cost leadership development training at the Wisconsin SBDC at UW Green Bay is funded in part through a cooperative agreement with the U.S. Small Business Administration, also known as the SBA. Our website is uwgb.edu/SBDC. We call these monthly no-cost 30-minute webinars our Secrets to Success series, designed to help small business owners and their executive team members increase their financial success. At the conclusion of this webinar, we will share the upcoming webinar topics, and we encourage you to consider registering for those. We thank Mickey and Tim from First Business Bank and Michael Wentworth of TMR Associates for their partnership in developing and promoting these monthly webinars and for their dedication to small business success. After the webinar, you will be emailed a link to a recording of this webinar. Now, during the webinar, you're invited to ask questions at any time. Please use the menu along the right side of your screen indicated here in the red circle. Type your question and hit enter. As soon as I see it, I will make note of it for the presenter to address toward the end of our webinar. And now I'd like to turn it over to our expert presenter this month, Tina Schulke, who is the founder and executive director of Change Management Communication Center. Tina?
Hey, thanks, Ryan. I appreciate the opportunity to share my passion about change management, and thanks to everybody who joined us today. I, again, am Tina Schulke, Executive Director at Change Management Communication Center here in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. Hey, Ryan, in my view on my display, I do not see the slides advancing, and I trust that they are. Do you have some good advice for me? Ah, there we go. Okay, I see that we're on the agenda. Great. In this 30-minute session, I'll introduce my business and share change process models. Together, we'll explore common obstacles to change and some best practices that help change move forward. I have some local data about change, and we can compare that to national trends about change management. We might have some time for questions and discussions at the end of this presentation, but if not, go ahead and get your questions entered on the panel on the right side of your display. Add your email address. I'll respond to your questions by email. You can also contact me by phone or email. You can check out our website and social media sites for more information about change management. I would really love to hear from you and get some feedback and your thoughts about this session. Okay, so here is a fun photo of the change management team. I'm in the middle. Anna, our change office support specialist, is on the left, and Laura, our change management specialist, is on the right. We help leaders advance how they address change. A few weeks ago, I had a client tell me that from our business name, she thought I was the person to call when you need to get through tough times. She said, but now I realize you're so much more than that. You have all the right connections. You share your skills about knowing how to run a stronger, better business. You help businesses grow. You think outside the box and help us reach that next level. Heck, you even made us aware there was a next level for our business. That was awesome to hear. And it's also true. Our agency serves clients who come to us with everything a business consultant does and more. We specialize in change management. We are not just good idea fairies telling you what should be done. We work with you so that as a leader, you advance how you identify, plan, and lead change. moment and think about change. I encourage you to write down what first comes to mind for each of these questions. We'll look back at this again later. First, think about what makes change difficult. What drives change? What makes change easier? And what changes are you working on? I bet everyone on this call is working on more than one change right now at work. It's important for leaders to be competent in leading change. Ryan, we can move on to the next slide too. So let's take a look at why leaders need to develop and practice change management skills. Studies show that 7 out of 10 changes in businesses fail to realize a return on their investments for change. And it's also true that 31% of leaders are fired by their bosses because they mismanaged change. That's more than any other reason. Fortunately, change management is a leadership discipline, and like other leadership disciplines, change management can be learned. So let's think about the changes you're working on. How much of those changes depend on people accepting a new idea and changing what they do, where they work, or how they work with others, what they buy or what they use. How much of that depends on people accepting and adopting the change? Almost everyone answers that question with about 100%. They tell me that the change totally depends on people changing. Have you ever experienced any of these signs of resistance? There's lower productivity, passive resistance, active resistance, turnover of employees, arguing about the need for change, disinterest, people reverting to the old way of doing things or not implementing the change. How about divides created between us and them? I've seen that happen. Change management is the process, models, and theories, along with best practices, that leaders use to help people accept and adopt changes. It helps leaders anticipate and mitigate these common pitfalls to change. Change management really is, again, that people side of change, the human side, helping people get from current state through a transition and into future state successfully. Change management works best when a change manager works with a project manager and a project sponsor. Again, it's all about research-based theory, models, and best practices. Here's what change managers are really responsible for. Ultimate utilization, proficiency, and speed of adoption. Speed of adoption is how quickly people get on board with a change. Proficiency is all about how well can people perform in the new way it is around here. So in that changed environment, do they have the tools and skills and resources they need to be proficient? And ultimate utilization is about how many people are actually performing and using that new way it is around here. So this all needs to take place so that projects stay on time, stay on budget, and realize a return on investment. Let's take a look at what an implementation curve might look like. This will give you a little idea of why 7 out of 10 changes fail to achieve the expected returns on investment. Let's say we're working on a process improvement change. The purpose of that kind of change is all about saving money. The vertical line on the left represents cost. The horizontal line represents time. The lighter blue area is the anticipated cost of implementing changes. And the darker blue area represents expected savings. Make sense? Okay, let's take a look at the next graph. If the changes are introduced and people resist getting on board with a process improvement plan, the speed of adoption curve grows and less savings are realized. The next graph shows the next phase of the impact of a slower speed of adoption plus some people never using the process change, that new improved process. They don't use the methods, the technology, or the equipment. Less than full utilization rate takes another bite out of the expected savings. And now proficiency. This is what can happen to savings when people are not proficient. They don't have the right tools or skills or knowledge to work in the new process. It's another savings loss. And here's what happens when people revert back to the old way of doing things or find workarounds to the new process. These are the costs associated when there's no reinforcement for change. Another bite out of the savings. It's a little later on in the timeline. And this, sadly, is the most common way changes suffer and savings are lost. A change management plan probably was not used. And there was a slow kickoff to the new process improvement. Can you imagine what the losses would look like when you add proficiency and ultimate utilization problems on top of this? Change management really is a key competency that every leader needs to keep their organization agile, innovative, and resilient. The rate of change is accelerating, and change management is key to successful change. So let's go back to thinking about how change starts. Think about the moment you first learn about a change. What do? Well, if you're like most people, you judge that change and decide whether that change is good or bad for you. Think about that when you lead change. People are going to make this assessment about any change you introduce. You can count on it. Knowing this, will it change how you introduce change? Take a look at the Kubler-Ross change curve. This change curve was first introduced by Swiss-American psychiatrist Elizabeth Kubler-Ross in her 1969 book on Death and Dying, and it was inspired by her work with terminally ill patients. This curve has since been commonly referred to as the change curve because people go through these stages with almost every change in their lives. The more significant the change, the easier it is to recognize the stages people are in. If we move on to the next application of this change curve, you can see some things you might hear at work as people are progressing through this change curve. In denial, they might be saying, oh, they aren't really going to go through with this. And you can look at denial, performance actually peaks because people are really working hard in a survival mechanism or way of being to demonstrate there's no need for this change. Then they become angry. What a waste of time and money. How much do those stupid consultants cost? And maybe they move on to bargaining after that. If they want me to do that, fine, but I won't have time to get on with my other duties. Or you might hear, if they make me do that, I'll resign. It moves on to depression, which is, as change managers, we call that the valley of despair. Productivity is usually pretty low, and so is morale. It can be a very short moment in your change process, or it could take a while. It depends on the individual and the type of change and how it affects them. At that point, people feel like there's nothing they can do about it. But from there, they move on to acceptance and go, well, this is how it is. And maybe it's not so bad. And that brings them to moving on, where they really integrate the change into their work and life and accept it and see that it's probably better than the old way. There's a change model that is very dependable. It's developed by another Wisconsin business, Inside Sales Pros. I like this model because it demonstrates that change can be a little like a game of chutes and ladders. We start out at awareness when we first get information about the change. Then we move on to assessment. At assessment, you can expect to hear questions from your team that need to be answered before they can move on to acceptance. At acceptance, we start to try out some of the changes. And at that point, people can move on to taking action and really acclimating to the change. The important thing to know is that everyone travels this model differently, and maybe even differently with each change. People move back and forth in the process when they get new information or have new experiences about the change. So as a leader, if you want people to take different actions and behave differently or achieve different results, you need to make sure they get what they need to accept and move forward through that change process. The change might be big or small. It might be a company-related thing or something related to specific individuals. But leading through those changes is necessary. It's not always easy to assist others through change. It can be filled with obstacles, but it is predictable, a process that's predictable. Here's another change cycle model, and this is adapted from Gestalt Institute's model for behavioral change. At each point in the process, there are triggers that can move people in and out of resistance. This is a great model to use to be sure that you, as a leader, are aware of where your team is in the process and give them what they need to get to the next phase. The most common mistake I see with my clients is that leaders are often several steps ahead of their team, and the way they introduce change can immediately trigger resistance. It's important to bring your team up to the same stage of the cycle as you so that you can engage them. A good change manager plans how they introduce change to accomplish that. For example, many people believe that this cycle starts at 12 o'clock in the dark. And then see the challenge, get started with the change, roll it out, see some results, and then it's time to move on. What I see is that most leaders at time to move on is where they start changing. They move into the dark and go, okay, something's got to change, I realize this, but I'm not sure what. And then they see the challenge, aha, I know what it is. And they get started. They know what the change needs to be. They set about figuring out how it will change and what it'll look like in the future and the process to get there. That's when they introduce the change to their team. Their team is still probably at results at about that, I don't know, what is it, 7 o'clock? Results is where your team is performing, and they're getting results from the way it is now, the way they know it. So they're not ready to move on. They're still in the dark, and they haven't seen the challenge. So it's up to you to get them through those phases before you get started. The next slide shows another dimension that change managers need to be aware of. The models are great for two-dimensional understanding of change, but there's also levels of resistance. That adds a third dimension challenge for leaders. Level 1 is all about information. It's the I don't know or I don't get it kind of questions that you'll hear at that point. Level 2 is about emotion. Usually about I don't like it. Sometimes the emotion can go in your favor though, and it's okay, what do I do? I like this. How do I help? Level 3 is about trust. And trust is probably the most difficult level of resistance to manage and cure or fix along the way. In fact, Dale Carnegie has a program and even a book about change called The Speed of Trust. They believe change happens at the speed of trust. I also believe that. The interesting thing is these levels of resistance, level 1 information, you cannot give somebody information if they're dealing with emotional or trust issues. Their brain, their amygdala kicks in and they're not ready for information. So understand what level of resistance you're working with and deal with the top level first to get through. Okay, let's take a look at what you might have wrote down or thought about with these initial questions. With what you know about change and the information I've shared so far, you now have some notes and tools to use to plan the high-stakes communications and activities you'll need to use to lead change. If you really want to build your competency for change, you can get training and certification in change management like I have, and you can also get a coach or a mentor who has developed a high competency for leading change. It's well worth the investment. Our next slide is all about tips for leading change. Take a moment to read through them. Create a clear view and vision. That's a great place to start. Give the team a clear sense of what they should focus on and get rid of the rest. Communicate the information people need to know and understand, but do it in ways that they can relate to. Tell them what's in it for them. Tap into your influencers, the early change adopters and promoters. These people help change move along easier. Listen openly and without judgment to questions. You're going to hear a lot of information. You're going to get a lot of feedback. If you don't, that's a trust problem. It's important to keep that trust and build on that trust by not judging those questions, but giving people what they need to move through the process. Really important to identify and discuss what's not changing. Gives you a little bit of firm ground to stand on. Identify the risks and don't hide them. If you hide risks, somebody's going to see it, and it's going to hurt trust. Clearly outline the actions, timeframes, process, and people involved. And then, over and over again, acknowledge that the change process is a process, and people will move through these stages differently. Prepare for that. Here's some cool information. I find it very interesting because I'm really a change management geek. I love it, and I love knowing about it and what's going on nationally, internationally, and locally. Some key things that I understand about our local client and network, which included about 170 people in Wisconsin, my clients and my business professional network. The national study was about 3,400 organizations. In both data sets, ineffective change management sponsorship from senior leaders was the biggest cause for success or failure for change. Locally, there's a lack of buy-in for needing change management. And there's also some confusion about the differences between project management and sometimes that they believe is change management. Communication problems about change showed up often as being insufficient and poor in our local area. And a lot of the time, there was a huge disconnect between project management, and I'll clarify that. Project management is caring for schedules, budgets, and tasks, and change management, so that disconnect. Change management is really caring for that human side of change. So think about that too when you're working on changes. Here is what have been found to be the biggest contributors to successful change. Again, number one, it's all about sponsorship, which is a good leadership quality and discipline to hone. Active and visible executive sponsorship was critical. Frequent and open communication about the change, and I would add with feedback loops, is important. Having a structured change management approach, especially at the onset, before you get started, is important as well. Dedicated change management resources and funding, employee engagement and participation, and then take good care of middle management. They're affected by change coming down from them by the top and resistance or information about the change coming from their team. They're really stuck in the middle, and sometimes they can be the biggest resistors to change because of that pressure. So I want to thank you. Those are the ideas and information I have to share. I appreciate your time and attention, and I trust that you'll use what we have shared today as you practice your change management skills as a leader. Hey, Ryan, are there questions we can talk about?
Absolutely. Thank you again, Tina. The question, and I'm going to go back to the slide, because the question came off of this slide in particular, but you talked about others changing with you, and I know most of us work within or with the team, but when is, when is the time to bring your team in on, the change cycle?
It works best when you invite them in right away. So if a leader notices it's time to move on, and they're still not sure what the change ought to be, but you know something needs to change, you kind of have a sense that there's a problem or something better, Bring the team in. Come out of the dark together. That'll get everybody moving along to see the challenge, and you'll get started at the same time, and it really builds a lot of buy-in.
Thanks, Tina. The last question that we have has more to do with this slide here with the levels of resistance, and I think you were talking about how this is kind of a three-dimensional approach to it. But what are some things that you've seen to get people to go from level 2 to level 3?
Oh, we don't want them to go from level 2 to level 3. If we can deal with information, change is easy. So level 2, these are, and maybe I can explain this different. Pretend that the people, the receivers of the change information or the change, have a hand of cards, and these are their cards. They're going to start asking you questions or behaving a certain way about the change. And level 1 is all about information. All they need to do to get on board is have more information. They're open. Level 2, the emotional phase, they're not so open. They might need more information, but they already don't like it. So they might think, oh my gosh, I'm feeling overwhelmed, or oh, this is another flavor of the day, and they're just disgusted and discouraged and frustrated. That kind of emotion, you won't be able to give a lot of information until you clear that emotion, and sometimes it takes time. Let it rest. Go back and talk again, or invite them in privately to talk one-on-one. Level 3 trust, it's all about, I don't have faith in you. I don't like you. I don't believe you can get us through it. You don't have my back. I don't think I'm going to have a job at the other end. There's a lot of fear and problems with trust. So you want to address level 3 and level 2 before you can give level 1 information. Does that make sense? Yeah,
I think that, and I think that I probably asked that question a little bit strangely, and I think I skipped a word or two from the real question, but you hit the heart of it in that, like you said, address level 2 and 3 before. I think that's the key. So, well, with that, our time is almost up, and I'd like to point out a couple other things coming up. So, Tina, thank you so much again for agreeing to present, and the information was extremely valuable. So, thank you.
Thank you, Ryan.
Next month, our webinar will feature Tara Fletcher of Fletcher Consulting, and she's going to present on how to ask for and get what you want. In July, Ken Ivey of Living Water Digital will present how to turn your 5-star reputation into a standalone marketing machine. Register for these and all upcoming webinars at uwgb.edu/SBDC. We also have several past webinar recordings there on sales, marketing, and leadership. And with that, I'd very much like to thank Tina Schulke as well as her teammates, Laura and Anna, all of Change Management Communication Center. I'd also like to thank First Business Bank and Michael Wentworth of TMR Associates. And thank you all for attending. Now, go lead your business through change.